Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is Halima from languagespot. Today we are going to practice English by listening to short stories. The Second Voyage of Sindbad the Sailor. I designed after my first voyage to spend the rest of my days at Baghdad, but it was no long ere I grew weary of an indolent life, and I put to sea a second time, with the merchant of no probity. We embarked on board a good ship, and after recommending ourselves to God, set sail. We traded from island to island, and exchanged commodities with great profit. One day we landed on an island covered with several sorts of fruit tree, but we could see neither man nor animal. We walked in the meadow along the stream that watered them, while some diverted themselves with gathering flowers and other fruits. I took my wine and provision, and sat down near a street betwixt two high trees, which formed a thick shade. I made a good meal, and afterward fell asleep. I cannot tell how long I slept, but when I woke the ship was gone. In this sad condition, it was ready to die with grief. I cried out in agony, beat my head and breast, and threw myself upon the ground, where I lay some time in despair. I upbraid myself 100 times for not being content with the produce of my first voyage, that might have sufficed me all my life, but all this was in vain, and my repentance came too late. At last I resigned myself to the will of God, not knowing what to do. I climbed to the top of a lofty tree, from whence I looked about on all sides to see if I could discover anything that could give me hope. When I gazed toward the sea, I could see nothing but sky and water, and looking over the land, I beheld something white, and coming down, I took what provision I had left, and went toward it, the distance being so great that I could not distinguish what it was. As I approached, I thought it to be a white dome of prodigious height and extent, and when I came up to it, I touched it, and found it to be very smooth. I went round to see it, if it was open on my side, but so it was not, and that there was no climbing up to the top, and it was so smooth, it was at least 50 paces round. By this time the sun was about to set, and all of a sudden the sky became as dark as if it had been covered with a thick cloud. I was much astonished at this sudden darkness, but much more when I found it was occasioned by a bird of monstrous size that came flying toward me. I remember that I had often heard mariners speak of a miraculous bird called the roc, and conceived that the great dome of which I so much admired must be its egg. In short, the bird alighted and sat over the egg. As I perceived her coming, I crept close to the egg, so that I had before me one of the legs of the bird, which was as big as the trunk of a tree. I tied myself strongly to it with my turban, in hopes that the roc next morning would carry me with her out of this desert island. After having passed the night in this condition, the bird flew away as soon as it was daylight, and carried me so high that I could not discover the earth. She afterward descended with so much rapidity as I lost my senses, but when I found myself on the ground, I speedily untied the knot, and had scarcely done so, when the roc, having taken up a serpent of a monstrous length in her bill, flew away. The spot where it left me was encompassed on all sides by a mountain that seemed to reach above the clouds, and so steep that there was no possibility of getting out of the valley. This was a new perplexity, so that when I compared this place with the desert island from which the rock had brought me, I found that I had gained nothing by the change. As I walked through this valley, I perceived it was strewn with diamonds, some of which were of surprising bigness. I took pleasure in looking upon them, but shortly I saw a distance such object as greatly diminished my satisfaction, and which I could not view without terror, namely a great number of serpents, so monstrous that at least of them was capable of swallowing an elephant. They retired in the daytime to their dens, where they hide themselves from the rock, their enemy, and came out only in night. I spent the day in walking about in the valley, resting myself at a time in such places as I thought most convenient. When night came on, I went into a cave where I thought I might repose in safety. I secured the entrance, which was low and narrow, with a great stone to preserve me from the serpent, but not so far as to exclude the light. I supped on part of my provision, but the serpent which began hissing around me put me into such extreme fear that I did not sleep. When they appeared, the serpent retired, and I came out of the cave trembling. I can justly say that I walked Cuban diamonds without feeling any inclination to touch them. At last I sat down, and notwithstanding my apprehension, not having closed my eyes during the night, fell asleep after having eaten little more of my provision. But I had scarcely shut my eyes when something that fell by me with a great noise awakened me. This was a large piece of raw meat, and at the same time I saw several others fall down from the rocks in different places. I had always regarded as fabulous what I had heard sailors and others related of the Valley of Diamonds and of stratagems employed by merchants to obtain jewels from thence. But now I found that they had stated nothing but the truth, for the fact is that the merchant came to the neighborhood of this valley when the eagle have young ones, and throwing great joints of meat into the valley, the diamond upon whose point they fall, stick to them the eagle, which are stronger in this country than anywhere else, pounce with great force upon those pieces of meat, and carry them to their nest on the precipice of the rocks to feed their young. The merchant at this time run to their nest, disturb and drives off the eagle by their shout, and take away the diamonds that stick to the meat. I perceived in this device the mean of my deliverance, having collected together the largest diamond I could find, and put them into the leather bag in which I used to carry my provision. I took the largest of the piece of meat, tied it close round me and the cloth of my turban, and then laid myself upon the ground with my face downward, the bag of diamonds being made fast to my girdle. I had scarcely placed myself in this posture when one of the eagle, having taken me up with the piece of meat to which I was fastened, carried me to his nest on the top of the mountain. The merchant immediately began their shouting to frighten the eagles, and when they had obliged them to quiet their prey, one of them came to the nest where I was. He was much alarmed when he saw me, but recovered himself instead of inquiring how I came thither, began to quarrel with me and asked why I stole his goods. You will treat me, replied I, with more civility when you know me better. Do not be uneasy. I have diamonds enough for you and myself, more than all the other merchants together. Whatever they have, they owe to chance, but I selected from myself, in the bottom of the valley, those which you see in this bag. I had scarcely done speaking when the other merchants came crowding about us, much astonished to see me, but they were much more surprised when I told them my story. They conducted me to the encampment, and there, having opened my bag, they were surprised at the largess of my diamond, and confessed that they had never seen any of such a size and perfection. I prayed the merchant who owned the nest to which I had been carried, for every merchant had his own, to take as many for his share as he pleased. He contented himself with one, and that, too, the least of them, and when I pressed him to take more, without fear of doing me any injury, "No," said he, "I am very well satisfied with this, which is valuable enough to save me the trouble of making any more voyages, and will raise as great as a fortune as I desire." I spent the night with the merchant to whom I related my story a second time, for the satisfaction of those who had not heard it. I could not moderate my joy when I found myself delivered from the danger I had mentioned. I thought myself in a dream, and could scarcely believe it myself out of danger. The merchant had thrown their piece of meat into the valley for several days, and each of them being satisfied with the diamonds that had fallen to his lot, we left the place the next morning and traveled near High Mountain, where there were serpents of prodigious length which we had the good fortune to escape. We took shipping at this first port. We reached and touched at the Isle of Roha, where the trees grow that yield comfort. This tree is so large and its branches so thick that 100 men may easily sit under its shade, the juice of which the comfort is made, exudes from the whole board and upper part of a tree, and is received in a vessel, which it thickens of consistency and become what we call comfort. After the juice is thus drowned out, the tree withers and dies. And is also found the rhinoceros, an animal less than the elephant but larger than the buffalo. It has a horn upon its nose, about a cubit in length. This horn is solid and cleft throughout the middle. The rhinoceros fights with the elephant, runs his horn into his belly, and carries him off upon his head. But the blood and the fat of the elements run in into his eyes and making him blind. He falls to the ground, and then, strange to relate, the rock comes and carries them both away in her claws for food for her young one. I pass over many things peculiar to this island, lest I should weary you. Here I exchanged some of my diamonds for merchandise. From hence we went to other islands, and at last, having touched at several trading towns of the continent, we landed at Bassorah, from whence I proceeded to Baghdad. There I immediately gave large presents to the poor, and lived honorably about the vast riches I had brought and gained with so much fatigue. Thus Sindbad, ending the relation of the second voyage, gave Hindbad another 100 squins, and invited him to come the next day to hear the account of the third. The third voyage of Sindbad the Sailor. I soon again grew weary of living a life of idleness, and hardened myself against the thought of any danger. I embarked with some merchant on another long voyage. We touched at several ports, where we traded. One day we were overtaken by a dreadful tempest, which drove us from our course. The storm continued several days, and brought us before the port of an island, which the captain was very unwilling to enter, but we were obliged to cast on shore. When we had furled our sails, the captain told us that this and some other neighboring island dwarfs we must make no resistance, for they were more in numbers than the locusts, and if we happened to kill one, they would all fall upon us and destroy us. We soon found that what the captain had told us but too true. An innumerable multitude of frightful savages about 2 feet high, covered all over with red hair, came swimming toward us and encompassed our ship. They shuddered as they came near, but we understood not their language. They climbed up the side of the ship with such agility as surprised us. They took down our sails, cut the cable, and hauling to the shore, made us all get out, and afterwards carrying the ship into another island from whence they had come. As we advanced, we perceived at a distance a vast pile of building, and made toward it, we found it to be a place elegantly built and very lofty, with a gate of ebony of 2 leaves, which we opened. We saw before us a large apartment with a porch, having on one side a heap of human bones, and on the other a vast number of roasting spit. We trembled at this spectacle and were seized with deadly apprehension when suddenly the gate of the apartment opened with a loud crash, and there came out the horrible figure of a black man, as tall as a lofty palm tree. He had but one eye, and that in the middle of his forehead, where it blazed bright as a burning coal. His foreteeth were very long and sharp, and stood out of his mouth, which was as deep as that of a horse. His upper lip hung down upon his breast. His ears resembled those of an elephant, and covered his shoulders, and his nails were as long and crooked as the talon of the greatest birds. At the sight of so frightful a genie, we became insensible and lay like dead men. At last we came to ourselves and saw him sitting in the porch looking at us. When he had considered us well, he advanced toward us and laying his hand upon me, took me up by the nape of my neck and turned me around as a butcher would do a sheep's head. After having examined me and perceiving me to be so lean that I was nothing but skin and bone, he let me go. He took up all the rest one by one, and viewed them in the same manner. The captain being the fattest, he held him with one hand, as I would do a sparrow, and thrust a spit through him. He then kindled a great fire, roasted and ate him in his apartment for his supper. Having finished his repast, he returned to his porch, where he lay and fell asleep, snoring louder than thunder. He slept till morning. As for ourselves, it was not possible for us to enjoy any rest, so that we passed the night in the most painful apprehension that can be imagined. When day appeared, the giant awoke, got up, went out, and left us in the palace. The next night we determined to revenge ourselves on the brutish giant, and did so in the following manner. After he had again finished his inhuman supper, on another of our seamen, he lay down on his back and fell asleep. As soon as we heard him snore according to his custom, 9 of the boldest among us and myself took each of us a spit, and putting the point of them into the fire till they were burning hot, we thrust them into his eye all at once and blinded him. The pain made him break out into a frightful yell. He started up and stretched out his hand in order to sacrifice some of us of his rage. But we ran to such places as he could not reach, and after having sought for us in vain, he groped for the gate and went out, howling in agony. We immediately left the palace and came to the shore, where with some timber that lay about in great quantity. We made some rafts, each large enough to carry 3 men. We waited until day to get you in them, for we hoped if the giant did not appear by sunrise and give over his howling, which we still heard that he would prove to be dead. And if that happened to be the case, we resolved to stay on the island and not to risk our lives upon the rafts. But they had scarcely appeared when we perceived our cruel enemy with 2 others, almost of the same size, leading him and a great number more coming before his at a quick pace. We did not hesitate to take to our rafts, but put to sea with all the speed we could. The giant, who perceived this, took up great stone and running to the shore, they entered the water up to the middle, and threw so exactly that they sank all the rafts, but that I was open and all my companions except the 2 with me were drowned. We rowed with all our might. We got out of the reach of the giant, but when we got out to sea, we were exposed to the mercy of the waves and winds, and spent that day and the following night under the most painful uncertainty as to our fate. But next morning we had the good fortune to be thrown upon an island, where we landed with much joy. We found excellent fruit, which afforded us great relief and recruited our strength. At night we went to sleep on the seashore, but were wakened by the noise of a serpent of surprised Atlantic thickness, whose scale made a rustling noise as he wound himself along. It swallowed up one of my comrades, notwithstanding his loud cries and the effort he made to extricate himself from it. Touching him several times against the ground, it crushed him, and we could hear it gnaw and tear the poor fellow's bone. Though we had fled to considerable distance, the following day, to our great terror, we saw the serpent again, when I exclaimed, "O heaven, to what dangers are we exposed! We rejoiced yesterday at having escaped from the cruelty of a giant and the rage of the waves. Now are we fallen into another danger equally dreadful. As we walked about, we saw a large tall tree, upon which we designed to pass the following night for our security, and having satisfied our hunger with fruit, we mounted it accordingly. Shortly after, the serpent came hastening to the foot of the tree, raised itself up against the trunk of it, and meeting with my comrades, and sat lower than I, swallowed him at once and went off. I remained upon the tree till it was day, and then came down more like a dead man than one alive, expecting the same fate as had befallen my 2 companions. This filled me with horror, and I advanced some steps to throw myself into the sea, but I withstood this dictate of despair and submitted myself to the will of God, who is disposed to our lives at his pleasure. In this meantime I collected together a great quantity of small wood, brambles, and dry thorns, and making them up into fagots, made a wide circle with them round the tree, and also tied some of them to the branches over my head. Having done this, when the evening came, I shut myself up within the circle, with the melancholy satisfaction that I had neglected nothing which could preserve me from the cruel destiny with which I was threatened. The serpent failed not to come at the usual hour, and went round the tree, seeking for an opportunity to devour me, but was prevented by the rampart I had made, so that he lay till day like a cat watching in vain for a mouse that had fortunately reached a place of safety. When day appeared he retired, but I dared not leave my fort until the sun arose. God took compassion on my hopeless state, for just as I was going, in a fit of desperation, to throw myself into the sea, I perceived the ship in the distance. I called as loud as I could, and unfolding the linen of my turban, displayed it that they might observe me. They had the desired effect. The crew preserved me, and the captain sent his boat for me. As soon as I came on board, the merchant and the seamen flocked about me to know how I came into that desert island, and after I had related to them all that I had befallen me, the oldest among them said they had several times heard of the giant that dwelt on that island, and that they were cannibals. And as to the serpent, they added that they were abandoned in the island, that they hid themselves by day and came abroad by night, after having testified their joy and my escaping so many dangers. They brought me the best of their provisions and took me before the captain, who, seeing that I was in range, gave me one of his own suit. Looking steadfastly upon him, I knew him to be the person who, on my second voyage, had left me in the island where I fell asleep, and had sailed without me or without sending to seek for me. I was not surprised that he, believing me to be dead, did not recognize me. Captain, said I, look at me, and you may know that I am Sindbad, whom you left in that desert island. The captain, having considered me attentively, recognized me. God be praised, said he, embracing me. I rejoice that fortune had rectified my fault. There are your goods, which I took care to preserve. I took them from him and made him my acknowledgment for his care of them. We continued at sea for some time, touched at several islands, and at last landed at that of Salabat, where sandalwood is obtained, which is much used in medicine. From the Isle of Salabat we went to another, where I furnished myself with cloves, cinnamon, and other spices. As we sailed from this island we saw a tortoise 20 cubits in length and breadth. We observed also an amphibious animal like a cow, which gave milk. Its skin is so hard that they usually make bucklers of it. I saw another which had the shape and color of a camel. In short, after a long voyage I arrived at Bassorah, and from thence returned to Baghdad with so much wealth that I know not its extent. I gave a great deal to the poor, and bought another considerable estate. Thus Sindbad finished the story of his third voyage. He gave another 100 squins to Hindbad, and invited him to dinner again the next day. Thank you so much for being with me. Hope you liked the video and share it with your friends. See you next time, and bye bye.